China's Sui and Tang dynasties, 581 to 907. With the end of the Han dynasty in 220, China plunged into a period of disunity and discord that might be compared to what is sometimes called Europe's Dark Ages, in which central control was lost. There were some important differences, however. Although China, like Europe, broke into separate localized kingdoms vying for power over the other, the society as a whole absorbed invaders and continued its own customs. And the nomads, who were not administrators, allowed the landowners to continue their bureaucracy. For 3 centuries, China experienced civil strife. During this time of trial, Confucianism, more a code of ethical conduct than a religion, provided inadequate for spiritual needs of the Chinese. Buddhism, which infiltrated through traders from India, began to fill this religious vacuum. Confucianism remained the basis of the educational system. Taoism, a philosophy of a more mystical nature, offered some rivalry. But the adaptable Chinese incorporated benefits from all 3 religions that enriched their disparate society spiritually, intellectually, and culturally. Cooperating with Turks in 552, the Chinese destroyed the barbarian Yuan Confederacy, although the Turks then set up a northern dynasty as threatening as the conquered one had been. Dynastic quarrels created dissension among the Turks, and in 581, the Sui dynasty swept away the last of the northern barbarian states, reuniting China once again. The first Sui leader, formerly General Yang Chen, but now known as Emperor Wen Ti, was ruthless and ambitious, yet in many ways he was an intelligent administrator. Under the previous system of separate kingdoms, defense of the home territory had required conscription of people into local armies for long periods of time, and taxes were high. Emperor Wen Ti reduced taxes and the length of required military service, set up irrigation schemes that increased production of food crops, and increased the empire by conquering southern and eastern China. Under Wen Ti's successor, Yang Ti, the 1,240-mile Grand Canal was rebuilt, which allowed grain and trade to travel between the east-west Yangtze Valley of the south to the capitals of Changyang and Luoyang in the north. The canal was a feat of engineering to rival the Great Wall, and it helped to enrich and tie the country together until the 20th century. Unfortunately, the Grand Canal came with an enormous price tag in terms of human labor. Millions of workers were forced into years of servitude in order to complete the great work. Emperor Yang Ti also assisted on the construction of palaces and pleasure parks for himself, and levied taxes against future heirs to pay for them. The peasants rebelled, and Yang Ti was killed in 618. The reunifying Sui dynasty had lasted less than 40 years. A strong Sui general named Li Yuan, the Duke of Tang, stepped into power. By 624, he had brought the country under control and begun the long period of progress and prosperity that would mark the Tang dynasty. Just 3 years after he had pacified the country, Li Yuan was ousted by his son Tai Sung. Like emperors before him, Tai Sung ascended to the throne with blood on his hands, having murdered 2 brothers. However, he proved to be one of China's outstanding rulers, a generous and intelligent emperor who brought an end to banditry within his realm and kept taxes low for the beleaguered peasants. He also reduced the dangerous military power of the aristocrats by breaking up the army into small units headed by commoners. As important as Tai Sung's military reform were his improvements to the civil service. The new emperor revived the Confucian ideal of advancement on merit through the civil service examination system. Any literate man could take the annual examination for civil service posts. So difficult were the tests encompassing poetry, administration, government, and the Confucian classics that only 2 to 10% of the candidates passed. Government officials were chosen from that select group, and though family connections might aid some in finding jobs, the system nevertheless placed thousands of highly able administrators into the Tang government. As he bolstered his country internally, Tai Sung looked for ways to expand it militarily. Within 50 years, Chinese armies had ventured into India, Central Asia, and Afghanistan, and set up protectorates in Sogdiana, Ferghana, and eastern Persia, areas directly north of India. In the north, the Tang occupied northern Korea and exerted considerable cultural influence on Japan. In the south, they dominated what is now Vietnam. The Chinese Empire had never been so vast. Lands under its control and on its periphery adopted Chinese language, culture, and political institutions. With the northern borders protected by Tang expansionism, caravans plodded regularly along the trails that made up the Silk Road to the west. This period of power and stability fostered literature, the arts, and many new inventions, so that the Tang years are sometimes referred to as China's Golden Age. Books proliferated after a system of printing on movable wood type was introduced. By carving images into a block of wood, pictures and text could be stamped onto many pages instead of being painstakingly drawn on each. Porcelain, made from different clays, was invented by the Chinese, with brilliant three-colored glazes attained by the Tang. Gunpowder was created accidentally by a scientist who was trying to make a potion to ensure everlasting life. Used first in fireworks for entertainment and to frighten an enemy, it later became a weapon. Tang aristocrats enjoyed a life of leisure and cultivation. Musicians and acrobats from abroad entertained the nobility in their elegant homes, furnished with ice-cooled fans, bathrooms, and water fountains. The sport of polo, too, arrived from abroad and became popular with the rich, who played it from the backs of Persian horses. Silver and gold jewelry bedecked the rich in their gorgeous silks. Tea, brought in from the south, became immensely popular, and in fact this beverage, made as it was from boiled sanitary water, may have contributed to an increase in longevity among the Chinese people in this era. The creation of poetry achieved heights never again equaled after the Tang dynasty. Chinese poets such as Li Po and Tu Fu praised the glories of the northern capital city, Changyang. With 1 million inhabitants, by far the largest city in the world at this time, deplored the tragedy of failing the civil services examinations, and reflected on the pleasures of fishing. In one of the more remarkable developments of any Chinese dynasty, the next truly powerful figure to take the Tang throne was a woman. Wu Chao began her career as Tai Sung's concubine. Upon his death in 649, she retreated to a Buddhist nunnery, as tradition required. However, she had already seduced Tai Sung's heir, Cao Tsung, who visited her in the convent and fell under her spell again. He brought her back to the palace and installed her as his mistress. Within the next few years, she had eliminated Cao Sung's wife and the other favored concubines and established herself as Empress Wu Chao. Smarter and more aggressive than her weak husband, Wu used him as a front for her own plans. Chinese armies expanded Tang control over Central Asia, eventually dominating a vast territory from Mongolia to Vietnam. After Cao Sung died, Wu installed one son and then another as rulers, and then forced the latter to abdicate so that she could assume sole authority. To back up her claim to the throne, she circulated a Buddhist text called the Great Cloud Sutra that claimed that the next Bodhisattva, Maitreya, a kind of messiah, would be a woman, namely the Empress Wu. Like many previous rulers, Empress Wu was both ruthless and logical. Although she didn't hesitate to eliminate those who opposed her, she appointed many highly able men, regardless of social class. Under her rule, the country remained stable and prosperous. Within a few years of Wu's death, her grandson, Xuanzong, took power. At first, his reign seemed to continue the shining cultural traditions of the Tang. The new emperor established an academy for poets and filled his court with writers, musicians, and painters. He became known as Ming Huang, the brilliant emperor. And yet, like his grandfather, he had a weakness for women. When he was almost 60, he fell in love with the beautiful courtesan Yang Guifei and began to neglect administration in favor of music and time with his young lover. Unfortunately, Yang Guifei persuaded him to give considerable power to a frontier general she liked, An Lushan, who then revolted in 755 and captured the capital. Fleeing the rebel, the emperor was forced by his own soldiers to have the beautiful Yang Guifei killed, an event that was immortalized in poetry by Bai Zhui. The disconsolate Ming Huang then abdicated to his son. In order to conquer An Lushan, the Tang commanders had to invite the help of an army of Turkish nomads, the Ogiars, who then took control of China for several decades. Although the Tang government ousted the Turks, it never really regained its former power. Gradually, Tang leaders lost control of the countryside. While the imperial court struggled with internal intrigues and plots by the palace eunuchs, the provinces fell prey to bandits and petty military commanders. These local warlords hardly fit the mold of the cultural Tang rulers. One of them, Huang Chao, was so offended by a poem satirizing his rule that he ordered the deaths of anyone capable of writing poetry. About 3,000 people were killed. Gradually disintegrating, the Tang regime continued into 907 as the population shifted from the north to the fertile Yangtze River Valley in the south, where new farming methods expanded rice cultivation. When, in 907, the Tang dynasty disappeared, China was split once again into 10 regional kingdoms and 6 dynasties. Khmer Empire, 600 to 1150. By the 1st century CE, Indian culture had spread beyond that country's borders and traveled along trade routes into Indochina. Indian traders carried gold and silver, cloth, and beads into Southeast Asia in exchange for spices, pearls, and other local products. They also brought Hinduism and Buddhism to the countries that would become modern-day Cambodia, Thailand, and Laos. Among the first countries to become Indianized was Funan, as Chinese chroniclers called it, located along the lower reaches of the Mekong River and into the Malay Peninsula. The nation was mainly agricultural, using large-scale irrigation to grow multiple crops of rice each year. Its rulers grew rich, controlling trade across the narrow neck of the peninsula. In the 6th century, one of Funan's vassal states, which Chinese histories refer to as Chinla, eventually overthrew its masters. The Chinla people, later known as the Khmer, established an empire that dominated the southern half of the Southeast Asian peninsula between the 7th and 13th centuries. Touched by Indian styles, but expanding on them, the Khmer created some of the world's grandest structures in art. At first, after winning their independence, the Khmer struggled internally with numerous factions vying for power. Around 800, a young prince named Jayavarman II began consolidating the empire, extending his country's boundaries northward through the Mekong River Valley. His capital of Jayavarman, I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, shifted from one location to another until after his death in 850, finally settling on the north shore of the Tonle Sap, or Great Lake in today's Cambodia. Named Yashadharapura, it was the Khmer capital from about 900 until the 5th century, when it gained the name by which it is now known today, Angkor. In the new capital, great building projects began. King Indravarman I built a huge reservoir and several temples, including the remarkable 5-level Bakong, or mountain temple. Served by the reservoir, the city itself grew until its city walls measured 2.5 miles on each side. After a period of internal strife, a new ruler, Rajendravarman II, brought peace to the capital. His successor, Jayavarman V, continued building at Angkor, including raising the rose-red temple of Banti Sri and beginning another temple mountain called Ta Kio. A later ruler, Suryavarman I, extended Khmer rule west into modern-day Thailand and reigned over a growing country with vigorous international trade. Like his predecessors, he was a builder, and Angkor was becoming known for its size and beautiful temples. Angkor spread over an area twice the size of today's Manhattan and supported perhaps 1 million people. A central government oversaw a uniform society that used an elaborate hydraulic system for transportation and rice cultivation. A complex system of canals and reservoirs retained and distributed seasonal rainfall, allowing the Khmer to obtain 2 or 3 harvests a year. In the dry season, the reigning king warred against the Cham to the north or the Siamese to the west for glory, treasure, and slaves. Although both Hinduism and Buddhism infiltrated the area, the Khmer of the early empire first embraced Hinduism. When Suryavarman II ascended the throne in 1113, Angkor was crowded with temples and monuments. He found a site outside the city on which to build his own Hindu temple, filled with carvings and now known as Angkor Wat. It dominates the plain where today the remains of 72 temples and monuments recall the metropolis that once existed. Fishermen in small canoes, a falconer, market vendors and buyers, spectators at a cockfight. The Khmer eventually fell to the Siamese in the late 14th and 15th centuries, but Angkor, with its dramatic temple of Angkor Wat, remained standing in the jungles of central Cambodia.